Fine. And I just want you to say, I didn't have a problem getting into the parking lot across the street.
Oh, you didn't.
No.
Are you okay?
So,
I have to figure it out.
okay.
I think we are on the air. Hello, everyone. Um, Welcome to Mediterranean Fire live stream as the fire of the sun makes life possible. Mediterranean Fire creates connections between cultural people that make life rich and meaningful. And today, um, we have with us a very wonderful person from Detroit. His name is Gary Anderson, and I'd like to introduce you to him first and his work. We will be broadcasting this in different parts of the world as well, so
Okay.
we can reach people with definitions
Mm-hmm.
from Detroit.
Okay.
And I'm just going to situate here for a second.
Sure.
All right. So here we are. Gary Anderson is the producing director of the Plowshares Theater Company in Detroit, the Plowshares Theater. And he has initiated this company in 1989.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout his career, he has directed plays with very interesting playwrights that I have read about, such as Charles Gordon, who wrote a play called I Am a Man,
Mm-hmm.
or Ron Milner, who has a play called Jazz Set, which I personally am going to look up
Okay.
very, very shortly. And Mr. Anderson has worked across the country in many states. And some of the names of his plays that he's put up are Woza Albert,
Mm-hmm.
Zoo Man, and The Sign, Pill Hill, The Piano Lesson, Buses, and Two Trains Running. And he has been nominated repeatedly for Best Actor by the Cleveland Plain Dealer, Bravo, and the Detroit News and the Detroit Free Press as well. And most recently, I don't know if it's most recently, but in the past couple of years, he has been able to develop works from a grant from the Kresge Artist Fellowship for Theater, which is one of the strongest foundations for the arts. And so that's really high energy. So I'd like to ignite a conversation
Okay.
about this what you talked about in some
Mm-hmm.
sessions about what I would describe as something like an extension of the colonization and colonialism that had taken place um, in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and that as a result of that of invading armies going into certain areas of the world where they decided that people were less educated than
Mm-hmm.
other people. Um, There, they through a colonialist process, they also started creating images of those
Mm-hmm.
people that were
Mm-hmm.
kind of romanticized. Like I know in the Arabic countries, they would that you could see images of the typical belly dancing woman with
Mm-hmm.
snakes
Mm-hmm.
around her,
Mm-hmm.
and in India again the romantic images of the Far East
Mm-hmm.
that they had, which were not really in sync with what was really
Right.
there.
Right.
So I wanted to talk to you about that, but I wanted the public to know because I kind of realized it myself when I
Mm-hmm.
was looking at Gary's work, is uh, uh, that actually in the 1800s this was happening in different parts of the world through the
Right.
colonial process,
Right.
and the slaves that were ripped out of their their place of being and taken as prisoners and trafficked to America and brought here,
Mm-hmm.
and then this of what you have described as what had happened to the African Americans in art and culture,
Mm-hmm.
and the images that were created of them was also happening in those other countries where they went to grab the people and bring them here. They were also doing it there in that country, and they were selling this image to the West. And then they ended up selling these images that were distorted back to the actual countries themselves.
Right.
So I'd like you to talk to us about how it happened with the African American in art and culture.
So one of the challenges of humanity is that we take pride in our selfness, right? We take pride in our independence and our abilities. And so, and in some cases, some people can get intoxicated high on their own supply is the way that they say it on the street, right? They get intoxicated by their own achievements. And so they assume a certain level of superiority over others. And that's definitely the case specifically in the West, but it's not exclusively in the West. How colonialism, as you said, basically gave Western Europeans, white Europeans, the carte blanche to go throughout the world and attempt to conquer, basically overtake cultures and peoples and civilizations all over the planet. And in part, part of the justification that you have to go through in your mindset to justify all that is that the people that you're taking advantage of, that you're abusing, that you're killing, or you're imprisoning, you're enslaving, deserve it. That there's some kind of justification for that. And that sets up in your head, and you find all kind of justifications. You use religion, you use science, you use the law, all ways in which to do that.
Maybe also the rational-minded structures and systems which are used in the West. Is like I always say it. They're seeing with their Western glasses, but it's like a game that they invented, that they're going to win because they invented the rules for it.
My granddaddy always said that you don't play a man at his own game. He did not create that game for himself to lose. And so that's what you have to comprehend. But it's not just West. I mean, we find also this kind of illness in regards to gender politics as well. So men have a tendency to justify their subjugation of women. So
and animals too.
And animals, exactly. Or the planet when we think about global
that's
warming.
What's going on.
Right,
yes.
and so you have to understand that that's at the heart of it. That's at the base of it. And so what happened was, as you said, through the slave trade and through bringing enslaved Africans from the west coast of Africa here, to justify that inhumanity, you have to find some kind of argument for your divine right to do that, and that you are actually improving their state of life by taking them from this more this underdeveloped region of the planet and taking them over here and giving them some sense of purpose. Their purpose is to serve you.
I'm just wondering, I haven't really thought about this point, maybe I don't know, but I know that the people who initiated the slave trade companies were the richest people of the whole new founding America project, whatever you want to call it. And do you think, like, also in the time of Jesus, just being able to nail a man onto a cross, I mean, is it because they're struggling themselves and they need something, and someone's like maybe giving them something so that they themselves don't die, that they're willing to go and do this kind of thing?
It's this constant conversation about strengths and weaknesses. We want to perceive strength as our ability to overpower others, as opposed to our strength of resolve with a singular purpose in life, which means that we might put ourselves in danger of dying. Okay, so I think if you're referencing somebody like Jesus or other prophets that came along, their commitment to the ideals and principles that they stood for are really designed around them being strong enough to not be wavered by the whims and social trends. You see what I'm saying? So it's a different way of interpreting strength. So going back to the circumstances. So here you have all these enslaved African citizens. So you're justifying why you have enslaved them, why you perpetuate the enslavement of them, and what benefit it is, and what happened, what began to happen in the late 18th century, but definitely in the 19th century, was the formation of ideas, of stereotypes, of images that were being presented of these people for the entertainment of whites to to justify the system of enslavement.
Exactly. I want to tell the public where we are in case they just joined in. You're watching WJZZ Cool TV, live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, and on other top social media channels. So please follow, like, subscribe, and share. And feel free to call in if you'd like to be a part of the conversation. We'd love to hear, what you think about what's being said, and also what you yourself have been thinking about in your everyday life and what you've encountered about what's going on here. So the phone lines are open if anybody would like to call in. Our guest today is Gary Anderson, the founder of the Plowshares Theater in Detroit, Michigan, an equity theater, and a pretty beautiful, amazing group of performers there, singers, dancers, actors, writers, composers, and do check it out because it's very important.
So anyway, what happened is that they began to create distortions of my ancestors in popular entertainment, in literature. So the first time you see a black face on a black person in a play written by an American, it's 1795, and it's a play called The Triumph of Love. And the character is named Sambo, and that's where that name gets started.
Oh, wow.
Later on in the 18th century, in the 1800s, you start seeing these blackface performers, men, white men, taking on what they are saying is the caricature of what they called Negro slaves. And one particularly was a man named Thomas Danforth Rice, known as Daddy Rice. And he was the one who created a dance and a caricature that he called Jim Crow.
Okay.
And the song he would sing was Jump Jim Crow. And we now know Jim Crow is a name that was a term that was used to define several laws that were developed that restrict the opportunities of African Americans.
Was that after this Jim Crow actor?
Right. Because these laws were basically doing what the image did. The image of Jim Crow, the caricature of Jim Crow was subjugating, distorting, and constraining the opportunities that displaying the ability, the lack of the abilities of black people.
Okay.
And so though that you go from a single blackface performer, somebody who took burned cork and darkened their faces and put gloves in their hands, a woolly wig, and put like red makeup around their mouth or white makeup around their mouth, and they performed as black people. And so the first time we actually see black characters on stage, they're not done by black actors; they've been done by whites.
And if you compare African art to this other Jim Crow version, it's a huge difference. The solid, beautiful statues all the way back from the ancient times, but that recently people in France have initiated demand that all of the African artwork that was confiscated in the 1800s, that is sitting in museums in Europe, has to be returned now to its
place of origin.
Yes.
Yeah, there are a number of artifacts in European museums that should be on the continent, from Egypt through all of northern Africa and parts into
as
the
well
west.
as Iraq also during the whole invasion in the 90s, that they opened the museum doors, and the people there were telling me that they saw that the museum doors were open,
Right.
and that they were calling to tell people in charge to shut the museum doors, but they, of course, it was open for a reason.
Right,
So
right.
yeah.
So these images that started off being performed by one actor on stage eventually end up developing into entire shows we called minstrel shows, where you'd have an entire company of men in blackface. And this is
So
how,
it did so well somehow.
right.
And do you think the public was ignorant, that they were just
There,
like, were they sold this fake image and they didn't know?
I'm gonna
Or-
answer that question by asking you a question. Do
All right.
you know that 74 million people voted for a man who did not care about their health, endangered their lives, took advantage of opportunities for corruption and tried to set up a race war in this country? Okay, so
Yes, yes.
so the answer is yes,
Uh-huh.
yes to both of those. Okay, so so you have these shows being developed, and they begin to propagate all over the country in tours. So you're going into parts of the developing territories on the North American continent before they become states. And only people there are white people, and they're seeing these shows that are depicting these images. So blacks are after the end of the Civil War, and they're emancipated, and they go to Idaho, North Dakota, Tulsa,
And
wherever.
what kind of can you describe some of the characters, like some of the archetypes?
Sure, I can. There was a whole host that were created, and they ran the gambit. And then there were some that have been developed after the minstrel shows. But the ones that were primarily developed in the minstrel show was the coon, which was a lazy, childlike, subservient black male. There was the mammy, who was an overweight, maternal black female. Both of those characters are asexual, and it's important to talk about their sexual identity as well, because the only way you could have them play in stories where they were around white females or children is that you had to perceive them as not having any kind of sexual identity. Therefore, you could safely put your children, your vulnerable members of your family, around them. To go towards the allure or sex appeal of white men primarily, but not exclusively, we had the mulatto that was created, which was a biracial character who had Caucasian features and was physically attractive to white men, and was there to entice them. And there's a variation of the mulatto called the hot mulatto, who is very overtly sexual. And so when you think about it, you look at the number of women black women who are in entertainment, who have been put on the pedestal as the most attractive, and you see that they are fairly complected. If they're not biracial, they have very fair complexion. Very infrequently in the history of this country have we looked at dark-skinned black women as the most attractive. One of the few times that it happened was in the 70s during the Black Power, during the Black Power movement. And we have started to get back into a consciousness about that now. You also had the city slicker, or what eventually evolved into the urban hustler, who was somebody who was a cheat. You could not trust them. And these stereotypes became so prevalent in the skits that would be done in these minstrel shows that they became part of the language of our entertainment. So whenever you presented entertainment dealing with black characters, these characters would play into them. Now, after emancipation, after the many African Americans that wanted to get into entertainment themselves took on these same roles. And so blacks began to perpetuate these stereotypes, these distortions that were created by whites for the benefit and entertainment of whites. In fact, in some cases, they presented themselves as the real coons. You've been looking at all these fake coons all this time. Now you're looking at the real coons.
Okay.
And so black minstrel shows popped up. And in fact, that was the main way African Americans got into the entertainment field. In fact, a number of them begin in the late part of the 19th century and then become some of the most popular performers in the early 20th century. The one of the byproducts of the minstrel show was the formation of the two-man comedy team. You know, like Abbott and Costello, Laurel and Hardy, all those kind of two-man comedy teams. That is actually derived from the minstrel show, because there was, in the large companies, a man called Interlocutor, who was the straight man.
What was his name?
Interlocutor. He was the straight man. He would pitch you the line that would then allow you to make a joke. And there were two comedians. There was Mr. Tambo, who played the tambourine, and Mr. Bones, who played the spoons and whatnot. And they would sit, the Interlocutor would sit dead center on the stage, and they would have a semicircle, and Mr. Tambo would be on one side, maybe the stage left, and Mr. Bones would be on the opposite side, on stage right, and Mr. Interlocutor would say, you know, like, why did your chicken cross the road? And so that was how, and then one of them would answer, and as opposed to having one straight man and two comedians, it was pared down to a straight man and a comedian. So that's how we get Abbott and Costello, Laurel and Hardy, Martin and Lewis, you know, those kind of. So you see what I'm saying? And so it had a huge impact on the formation of our entertainment, whether we realize it or not.
You are watching Wjzz Cool TV, streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, and other top social media channels, the coolest station in the world. Like, follow, subscribe, and just share. We are with Gary Anderson is in the studio today, and we're talking about a lot of philosophies and that he's developed during his foundation of his Plowshares Theater since 1989.
Right, and just to finish up on that, and so there were some that were developed after minstrel shows in the Hollywood through entertainment, and one of those was the formation of the brutal black buck. This was a large, superhuman strength black male that was almost animalistic, that could be feared, and also had a obsession with white females. Now, you see that manifested for the first time on film in the movie from 1915, D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. There is a black Union soldier, a white man in blackface, who chases after this pristine little young Southern belle. He chases her across her plantation to a cliff. They're supposed to be in Georgia. Guess what thing they don't have in Georgia? They ain't got cliffs. So they chase her to Georgia. They chase her to this cliff, and he's saying, "I love you. I want to be with you," and she doesn't want to be touched by him. She's repelled by him, and she has an option. She could either go into his arms and be taken advantage, or she could jump off this cliff. We know which choice she makes. So she jumps off the cliff. Her father comes back. You know, this is all antebellum, so he's impoverished. He comes back. He can't find her. And amazingly, like a hound dog, he finds her at the bottom of this ravine where she's jumped off the cliff. And that is the thing that justifies the formation of the Ku Klux Klan in that film. I'm serious.
Oh my God. Wait.
So they use the fear of the black male and their subjugation of white females to justify the need to create a vigilante force to protect white Southern sanctity.
Absolutely.
And that was a film. That was a film that was presented to President Woodrow Wilson in the White House, and he said it was historically accurate.
Absolutely ridiculous. Yes.
So we see that when you think about the way they described Michael Brown, the way they described Tamir Rice, the way they George Zimmerman described Trayvon Martin, the way they described why they had to overpower George Floyd. You hear this constant refrain of that we were afraid for our lives. We have the guns. There's more of us, but we are afraid of this unarmed black male because of his superhuman strength.
Mm-hmm.
You see that manifested in King Kong, because what is King Kong? But a manifestation of this stereotype as an animal. And what is his kryptonite? His kryptonite is a white woman. And so we have this perpetuated in our culture. And black theater was a formation, was a art form that was created to actually combat all of that. Because what that does, and what we were saying earlier about the justification for why whites enslaved blacks and why they attempted to conquer other parts of the planet, is because they have assumed a superiority and a power that is not theirs. And so part of that has been perpetuated through their culture, not just through their erroneous assumptions of science, but also through their culture. These images that we're talking about, and so black theater begins to be developed as a way in which we create a different narrative, a counter narrative.
Wasn't there the activist that you were speaking about once, the activist and writer W.E.B. Du Bois?
Du Bois, yeah.
Du Bois.
He pronounced it Du Bois because he was trying to divorce it from the French.
Oh, okay. It means the forest.
Yes, right. Yeah, he actually comes in 1926, and we'll talk a little bit about that because I think that comes from. But the first black theater that was ever founded in this country was 200 years ago in 1821 by a West Indian who immigrated to America, and he first started a tea garden restaurant where they performed shows, and in 1821 they put on one of their first shows, which was a play called King Shotaway, which was about a black rebellion in the West Indies. It was historically based, and the whole point of black theater being formulated was an attempt to correct the narrative, to present a different perspective, to show self-determination and self-definition. We decide who and what we are and what we're capable of, and we also set the course for where we are going.
Did you hear that, everyone? Listen, could you repeat that, please?
We decide who we are and what we're capable of, and the direction by which whereby we are going. That's the self-definition and self-determination. Those are the two main principles behind black theater, and that's the reason why it's just as relevant today as it was 200 years ago. Unfortunately, that theater, which was called the there's several different names. Scholars haven't been able to. It's called the African Company. It's also been called the African Grove Theater or African Grove Company. But whatever the case may be, the company lasted for at least 3 years. And it performed both white authored plays, but it also developed some original works by black writers. And everybody that performed in it was black. They were freed blacks, and the audience was freed and enslaved blacks as well as whites that came to attend these shows. But they were shut down because of harassment by the police and by ridicule by critics at the time.
Absolutely. Oh my God.
And hoodlums that would come by and agitate them. They were not left alone.
Difficult, yeah.
But that is the foundation. And then, as you were saying, you bring up W.B. Du Bois. So in the 1920s, during the Harlem Renaissance, the New Negro period, we're looking at ways in which we're trying to improve the circumstances of African Americans. We've just gone through the Red Summer, where there was all these horrific race riots where whites came in and basically brutalized black communities all over this country and savagely murdered innocent black people. We've gone through 1921. We have the Tulsa Race Massacre. So we have all these events, and we had and from the early 1910s into the early 1920s, we have this long list of lynchings that are occurring all over the country, primarily in the South, but not exclusively in the South. And so scholars and thinkers like Du Bois are trying to find ways in which they can use the arts as a tool to empower and to correct. And so one of the methods that he comes with when he becomes editor of the the crisis magazine for the NAACP is he creates a competition for the writing of new plays, and he believes that if he can inspire people who haven't thought about theater or playwriting beforehand, like poets, short story writers, novelists, that he might be able to create a method by which these plays can actually do those two things again: self-determination, self-definition. And he does. He's successful. He encourages a young writer like Zora Neale Hurston to write for the theater. Langston Hughes to write for the theater. There are young women who are poets, like a woman named Marita Bonner, who begins their writing for the theater. And these are people who submit plays to his competition, and they win or get recognized. And so you start developing a group of folk who find it engaging to create works about themselves, for themselves, by themselves. In fact, he comes up with this strategy, and he calls the criteria for building these Negro theaters a theater that is about black people, for black people, by black people, near black people. That last one is critical, because we have a tendency to once we assume that we're successful, we want to go where all the other successful institutions are. And what our greatest strength is in rooting ourselves in the foundations of our communities, because you can be sustained in that capacity. Your neighborhood, you are a neighbor, a citizen of that community, and you matter to that community, and you also provide a venue for that community to reflect its own issues and topics of concern.
This Du Bois reminded me also a lot of the discourses that were taking place amongst people in the cultural sphere that would congregate in theaters in post-war Beirut, when the war just finished and the country was divided, and then suddenly they could now meet again and find each other again, and they would, everything was bombed out and there was no electricity, but the Beirut theater was running. And so people would go there, and they would they would sit in the theater, and discussions would take place. Now the new prime minister with all his money is coming, so you have all these discourses about how are we going to construct our society, what needs to be done, and the same discourses were taking place. They had come to the conclusion that the cause of the war was a universal type of art that did not have really, it was kind of distance really from what was really happening locally, and they wanted art to be about what was really happening, and so all these concepts they were creating at the time was to bring art into the everyday, and so I did write a play also about a lot of things related to Lebanon, and one of them was this of what I experienced in the theater there, and so there would be, I took what we were talking about before, these archetypes of images that have been created about the Far East and Arabs and other cultures, Africans, and I designed it as a play in itself, where a spirit leaves a body and goes to the afterlife and finds the doors to truth. But it's all done in a very etherical way, using postcards from the turn of the century and all these kind of things. And then these discourses come in from the people in the theater of why they don't like it and what they want, and yeah, so
I have a tendency to make a connection between that experience and the way in which culture is integral to the way we live our lives as human beings. In many cases, we have a tendency to want to go for empirical knowledge. We experiment, we use scientific research, we use logic, and all those things, and it is designed to make us feel smarter about ourselves because we address it. But there is a gap in many cases of looking at the world exclusively through those lenses. There is an emotional truth that exists that sometimes it is actually the responsibility of art and culture to present the emotional truth of a circumstance or a situation. You may be in a situation, you may have had an experience with a loved one, with a significant other, and there is some rift, there's some challenge, or something that you've gone through, something that you wanted desperately that you weren't able to achieve, and you can't really articulate your feelings to someone else. And then you hear a song, or you read a poem that puts into words, puts to a tune exactly how you feel. That's the power of the arts.
Yeah, and
that's the emotional truth that I'm talking about.
But I think we've gone so far into science and math and technology, and for that, art is very sparse now. People,
we have starved the arts for the last 40 years. It's been an intentional design to impact the arts, to weaken them, because they have power. They actually have been able to transform communities and cultures and civilizations and get ideas across to a people. Why is it that the things that many oppressive cultures around the country, around the planet, first thing they do is they curtail the control of the arts. They can tell the art, the visual art you can see, the literature that's available.
Absolutely.
They take away the music you can see.
Because they know that through the senses is how we can dominate a person.
Well, how we can educate and how we can expose them to different points of view, and we can empower them with the ability to entice others to come see their point of view. That's why, in many cases, when you see the most totalitarian forms of government, the first group of people that they subjugate are the artists. You have to understand that. That's not a joke. When Reagan came into power, one of the agencies in the federal government that he attacked the most was the National Endowment of the Arts and National Endowment
especially
of Humanities.
with the background as an actor, supposedly.
No, it makes perfect sense because he wasn't a very good actor. He didn't understand the power of what he's doing, and so he was a Hollywood celebrity, and I think that's the difference.
And this difference also, I'm very surprised sometimes. Now I'm realizing when I speak with people that they're interested like in many things, in healing and meditation, etc., but they never knew that theater, the origins of theater is catharsis. It's to go within yourself and find something and get it out and express it.
I tell a story about a situation that allows you to identify with me in my plight, and you go along with me on this journey, and you see me are challenged. And if the story is designed for me to overcome, you see me overcome those challenges, and you go through that experience without having to endure any of the pain. But you learn something.
You have the transmission of the energy
exactly. And that's the thing. It's the power of the arts.
It's amazing.
That's the power of the arts.
You are listening and watching to Wjzz Cool TV, the coolest station in the world, streaming live on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. Subscribe, share, like, and comment. We are here with Gary Anderson talking about theater, catharsis, and the history of the black image in culture in America.
So here's one of the things that's to bring this to Detroit, to bring this here to where we live right now. This is one of the challenges that we find. We found ourselves acquiring political power in this city with the election of Coleman Young in 1973, that moved the country, the city, into a different direction. Right, began to empower a whole sector of the city that had not been empowered beforehand. But in those last 50 some odd years, there really has been, they've constantly been thwarted. They've been thwarted by federal policy. They've been thwarted by cultural policy that has denounced the importance, the relevance. And so economics have had greater sway to the point where we find ourselves challenged, right? But the arts are a tool that could have consistently been used to assist in the improvement of the circumstance.
And they have proof. Even some big corporations have sent people into certain struggling communities to see what it does to have them like meditate or something, and they see that the results are very good, and still they decide not to continue with it
because some people don't want to heal.
Yeah.
Some people don't want you to be made well. That's intentional. And so you have to understand, you got to take control of that and use that power to benefit you and your community. And that's really where the arts come in. And so Plowshares, as Detroit's only professional black theater company, we're designed on assisting in correcting the narrative, because there are many people who want to distort the realities of what exists here on the ground in the greater Detroit area. They want to question the validity and the ability of specifically African Americans to set their own course, to define who and what they are. And we are constantly challenged by that, and we need all the tools available to us to help make that correction. And the arts, theater, is one of those ways. And if we ignore that, the storytellers, if we ignore people who help engage our minds and push us to see things in a different way, we will not be as creative as we need to be in other areas. We will not find the solutions to our issues like massive hunger, issues like the challenges that we have with employment in this community. We won't, because we will constantly allow ourselves to become victimized by a system that is designed on seeing us as a commodity.
Absolutely.
And not as a vital, important, and intelligent factor in the fabric of this area.
Yes. And it seems it's really a shame, because since the subconscious doesn't know the difference between what is reality and what is theater, we can heal so much with theater. People with layers of trauma, generational trauma.
But that's something that can be healed with the arts.
But we're in a situation anyway now where people are taking a lot of medication, and I'm not sure if they would actually be able to heal if they're on those medications.
It's a matter of exposure. It's a matter of constant exposure, and you have to go into the process believing that you can make a difference, or otherwise, why are you doing it, right? So you have to believe in that, and the Plowshares, we follow a tradition that was set in place back on the continent by West African cultures. There is there in many of the communities of West African nations, there is a figure called the griot. That's a French word, but the traditional word is jolly. These are historians. It was in many of these communities, it was a caste system. So you were born into the caste of being a jolly or a griot. And your responsibility to the community, to the culture, to the community, to the tribe, was you were the oral historian. So you retained all of the information of this community in your head that could be retold, performed for others through music and through lecture, and you use these stories, you used all this history as a way of keeping the values and mores of that community on track. So we knew who we were, we were never wavering from that, and we knew who we had been, right? We used the names of ancestors, we kept them alive because we thought it was important for us to retain their lessons. And so we were able to use those to teach the next generation. And we also created for ourselves ways in which we could communicate to others who we were and what we valued. So when we came to the table to negotiate, to congregate, we were able to come as bringing who and what we were to that table, so people would comprehend that we had value.
Yes. And how about if we have 5 minutes left, and I'd like to talk about the theater that you're doing now, the projects that you're doing. There's a project called Roost, and I know before that there was one called Hastings Street.
Hastings Street is a musical that we began developing prior to the pandemic. It's set in Black Bottom, roughly around 1949, about 3 months after the federal government is signed into law the legislation that will eventually end up being used to raise Black Bottom and Hastings Street in Detroit.
Okay, and the actors, like you're working with a composer and a writer.
Right. We have the pieces being written by John Sloan III and Chris Johnson. Both of them are artists that were developed in this area. They both left. John was in the touring production of Lion King. Chris began to tour professionally, and he eventually ended up getting a gig teaching at this University of Utah in Salt Lake.
Okay.
I brought them back to work on this project. Well, John was already back. Chris was trying to come back because he has kids here.
And the actors, the actresses and actors, are they people that you work with usually on a regular basis?
They are people. They are local artists that we have here that we have worked with before. The idea here is Plowshares exist to cultivate local talent. We are not here to bring people from somewhere else here, pay them, and then have them take their money and go back where they were, because that doesn't build the cultural community here. That really doesn't sustain the creativity of artists here. That only serves to support folks that live in New York or LA or somewhere else.
And how does I'm just curious because I really love like the voice work and I saw the online jazz concert based on the storytelling that you did. It was so beautiful with all of the what kind of how do you direct a play? What techniques or how do you work with the actors?
Well, you want to start with the story. You want to start with what you want to get across. Again, everything we've been talking about. I believe that you use the arts as a way of teaching lessons to a community. And yes, we are here to entertain, but we also have the purpose of teaching lessons, exposing people to ideas that they may not have been exposed to before. And in the course of the story, specifically in Hastings Street, you have to look at what that devastating event was, and how the impact of it began before the first building was torn down, and how it created for people who had established family businesses, who had roots in that area that were now going to be displaced, and what that meant to them, and how disjointed it was, and how devastating. You talk about trauma, how devastatingly traumatic it is for us to continue to talk about that. We talk about it today, but the impact of it persists. In many cases, the residents of Black Bottom that stayed in Detroit moved to other parts of the region, more specifically into the 12th Street area. So it's their children, it's the children of those of those Black Bottom residents who are who are on the streets during the riots in '67.
Are we finished? Okay, so we're off the air.
Okay.
I didn't see the light go on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry because usually that light comes on.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi.
I'm John.